So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for another in our series of webinars for the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition. This one, the Civic Knowledge, Skills, and Dispositions in the Elementary Classroom with Discovering Justice. So we're fortunate to have with us today Laura Brenner from Discovering Justice and Fabiane Naranja from Cambridge Public Schools. We'll hear some more about their backgrounds in just a moment. My name is Dave Buchanan. I'm the Director of Massachusetts Programs with iCivics, and I'm here representing the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, which is the host for this session, as I just said. We are going to ask that you please include your name or rename yourself so that you have your name, your school district, and your grade level. And if you're not a teacher, please include your organization instead of your school. So just to get us started here on some of the basics, I think all of us live in the Zoom world at this point, so we're pretty familiar with this, but we are recording this session, just so you know that. We are going to ask you to stay on mute for most of the session, but there will be moments and some time later in the session when you can interact with some of the other folks, and feel free to unmute then. You're welcome to use the chat at any time to incorporate any questions or comments you might have in the course of the session. So feel free to do that. And again, if you have some tech issues as periodically come up for all of us, feel free to go off screen if you need to, and hopefully that will straighten things out for you. So as I said, I'm here representing the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition. That's a coalition of now over 50 organizations from across the state. And we came together back in 2017 originally to serve as a unifying voice to support improved civic education here in Massachusetts. And we were major champions for the civics law that came to pass in 2018. That many of you are quite familiar with, I'm sure. In addition, we continue to advocate for improved funding for civic education. We have successfully advocated for funding in the last 2 budget cycles and are looking to do that again. And if you're interested actually as an educator in joining us in some of that effort, we would certainly welcome you this year. We're really trying to incorporate teacher voice and teachers and your own experience in our advocacy efforts. So feel free to contact us about that. I'm going to actually include here at this point a couple of links that will be helpful for you this session. The first one is a resource list for this webinar, which includes links to the slides, as well as many of the resources that we'll be referring to. In addition to that, there's also a participant note catcher, which is specific to the content that Laura and Fabiane will be sharing with us from Discovering Justice. So if you're looking for a way to connect with the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, you can look at the links in that first set of links, the resource list for this webinar, and you'll find all kinds of links there, including how to contact us. So these sessions, all of these webinars are designed particularly to address particular needs in Massachusetts. About a year ago, Circle, which is an organization that does research on civic education across the country, joined forces with the Mass DESE and the organization at Boston University to study the state of civic education here in Massachusetts. And there were a couple of key recommendations from that, which included particularly focusing greater attention on the needs of high needs districts, ensuring that there's greater equity in the distribution of resources, and particularly PD across districts, and particularly those high need districts. The need for greater attention in the elementary grades, particularly that there simply is not much attention paid to that content in the elementary grades right now. So we're really focusing on that, particularly in this session here. Another key finding that I think particularly pertains to this session is we're finding also that many administrators are looking for additional support in how to support teachers in the classroom in teaching civics and evaluating civics instruction, and generally providing good support for curriculum in civics education across the state. So that's another focus area that we're hoping to key into today in this session. And we hope that a number of you as administrators can take some of the ideas that are presented today in this session and put them into practice in your own districts. So I'm going to turn it over here to Laura and Fabiane to take it away. I do want to point out that Laura is a longtime participant and member of the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, as Discovering Justice is, and has been really very active on the Teaching and Learning Committee, particularly in the coalition, and has a really strong background that she will outline in both teaching as well as in working in the nonprofit world, as well as now moving into some work as an administrator in school. So I think she brings a particularly unique perspective to this work, a sort of intersection of all of those different skill areas. And we're looking forward to hearing from you, Laura. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Laura Brenner, and I'm the Education Program Director at Discovering Justice. I've been with Discovering Justice since 2019. Prior to that, I was in the classroom in Boston. I was a teacher in grades 2, 4, and 5 and did some instructional leadership work in Boston Public Schools. And currently, in addition to being the Education Program Director at Discovering Justice, I am also in the School Leadership Program at Penn. And that has brought me to the King Open School, where I am school-based part-time as a principal intern, which has really been a great way to just anchor the work at Discovering Justice in the happenings day-to-day of schools across the state, and has really been such a particular blessing because I met a wonderful educator, many wonderful educators, some of who are on the call today. So hello, King Open folks, and one who I have as a co-facilitator. So Fabiane is going to introduce herself, and I'm just so honored and grateful that she's able to share her perspective with us today. So Fabiane.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you so much. As Laura said, I am a kindergarten teacher in the dual language immersion program, Portuguese English at the King Open School. I've been there for 10 years now. Before that, I was a teacher in my country, Brazil, for 20 years. So the total is like 30 years of teaching. I moved to America to pursue a master's degree in instructional leadership 11 years ago, and I never went back to Brazil, but I've been teaching in the King Open School since then. Then a few years ago, I decided to pursue the CAGS program to become an administrator, but I feel like the program gave me the leadership skills that I needed in order to be a teacher leader. I don't intend to be an administrator, but I do want to be an instructional leader. And I recently started teaching at Salem State University and their teacher preparation program in order to talk about the different things, the different challenges that teachers face nowadays. And I think the CAGS program pretty much gave me that opportunity. And so I have been piloting the Children Discovering Justice curriculum since the beginning of this academic year. And I have to say, it's been a passion of mine since then. So thank you so much for being here and listening to us.
Thank you. And before I go to the next slide, I just have to do a quick shout out. It is Fabiane's birthday today. So an extra thank you for being here with us to celebrate not just your effort in civic education, but for your birthday as well. So thank you and happy birthday.
Thank you.
So today we're going to really get into the what, the why, and the how of civics. And hopefully you'll walk away with some resources and takeaways to implement tomorrow in your classroom or district or school. The goal of the webinar is to support your deepening of understanding the Massachusetts frameworks for social science and history, particularly the practice standards. And we want you to walk away feeling more confident and equipped to support and cultivate civic knowledge, skills, and dispositions, whether it be in your classroom with students, your school, your district, And in order to help us do that, we ask that you're present with us today, have your camera on, participate in the chat when and if you're able. Please ask questions, share your own perspectives and ideas, and just be curious and reflective. With that, I'm putting in the chat a note catcher to kind of help you stay engaged and record your own ideas. We work best when we not just learn from you and you learn from us, but it's a shared experience. So please feel free to make a copy of that note catcher so that you can edit it directly. And we will ask you to submit an exit ticket at the end as well. So some background on Discovering Justice. Our organization has been around for over 20 years. We're located out of the Moakley Courthouse in Boston, and our mission is to bring students and communities together to examine the workings of the justice system, explore the ideals of justice, and prepare our community members to engage in our democracy. And we do that through 3 strands of programming. We have our in-school programs, which we'll be talking about today, our K-5 Children Discovering Justice curriculum, along with professional development. We're piloting a program for grades 7 through 12 this year, our topics program. We have our longstanding after-school program, mock trial and mock appeal for middle school students. And then we also offer in-courthouse programs. We bring students grades K through 12 into the courthouse for field trips. We offer tours to students and adults. And we also host events online and in the courthouse. We're actually hosting an event next week with the New England Innocence Project, featuring Sean Ellis and the executive director of the New England Innocence Project for middle and high school students. And I'll share with you that resource at the end of the webinar. But I know most of you here today are really to focus on our K-5 Children Discovering Justice curriculum as we think about applying civics to younger students. So our Children Discovering Justice curriculum is a Massachusetts standards-based curriculum, and we created it in partnership with educators in Springfield and Boston Public Schools through a grant this past year. We've been piloting it in schools in Springfield, Boston, and Cambridge, and it will be available free for educators Massachusetts wide starting in the fall. Then we'll embark on developing grades 3 through 5. The curriculum centers around this core question of what is justice and how do I use my voice to advocate for it? And we take students through 4 modules. First, students look at justice in their daily lives, their interpersonal relationships, their classroom. Then they explore justice through a grade level standards-based topic. Then students learn about a movement of justice and ultimately engage in a mini civic action project. And these are the grades, these are the topics for each grade. So in kindergarten, it's fairness and rules. In grade 1, we focus on elections, voting, and leadership. 2 is the environment. 3 through 5, again, is our next stage in development, which will be Indigenous justice, immigration, and US constitutional or civil rights. And there are several components of the Children Discovering Justice curriculum, along with lesson plans. There's accompanying slides, vignettes, vocabulary protocols, student practice activities, anchor charts, formative assessments, rubrics, and read aloud connections. And we're going to be highlighting several of those for you today: the vignettes, the vocabulary, the practice, and the discourse. So what is civics? We use that word all the time, and I always like to anchor us in just making sure we have a shared understanding of that. And according to the National Council of Social Studies, civics is the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that we need in order to engage effectively within our democracy. And when I say democracy, I really mean the structures and the communities that exist in multiple tiers. So our classroom and school, our neighborhood, our town or city, our state, our country, and our world. And of course, there's so many added circles to that: our friends, our families, religious groups, sports teams, hobbies, all of the structures that our lives touch. And so I'd love to open it up to you just to think about our world today. Think about the students that you teach, the students that you support teachers to teach. And what do you think it is that young people need to learn in order to engage and participate effectively in all of these democracies? And as some words come to mind, please share out in the chat. that their voice matters. Thank you, Jennifer from Nantucket. Empathy, critical agency, explore their own values and identity. Students need to understand that everyone brings something to the table. So thinking about windows and mirrors, right? Not just understanding our own identities, but the identities of others. Their role, historical context that they need to be aware, understanding of issues, exposure, taking action to deliver justice, critical thinking, absolutely. And please keep these coming. So I love to start there and then go to this lens of really what it is, not that just we want to teach, but what is it that we have to teach? A lot of what you said in the chat is reflected in the standards that educators in Massachusetts must teach by law. In June of 2018, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Ed voted to approve a revision to the frameworks. And the frameworks that we work to revise really embody a lot of these elements, really all of these elements that you're sharing in the chat, and why it's so important for us as educators, as leaders to understand is that when in a subject that's already marginalized, like social studies and civics, and particularly in communities that are marginalized, if we don't have the context that we actually are able to teach these important skills by law, we're required to teach them, it makes it harder to take that time to teach these skills to our students. And, you know, knowledge is power, this quote from Kofi Annan. When we understand that these important skills and dispositions are required by law, we can take back some of that time and really integrate this into our practice. And so I want to just anchor it for us there today before going into what these standards actually look like. So the revised frameworks that happened in 2018, which wasn't too long ago, and before that, David and I were reflecting on the standards before that were from 2003, and what a long way we have come. So the frameworks are anchored in these three pillars. We have our content standards, the pieces that that students need to know about geography, about historical events. We have our literacy standards, what students need to be able to read about, write about, how they're communicating, and then the standards for history and social science practice, which we're going to go in depth with today. And these are the 7 pieces here, starting with demonstrating civic knowledge and dispositions. And I'll give you a moment just to glance through all 7 and think about how interrelated all of these are and how these are pushing our students to become engaged participatory members of their communities, some of those skills that you mentioned in the chat. So focusing on this first one, demonstrating civic knowledge, skills, and dispositions, a brief anchoring of how this looks in grades K through 5. This comes straight from DESE. In K through 2, if we think about those concentric circles, it's really focused on our local communities, our classrooms, our families, our neighborhoods. In 3 through 5, it expands outward to our state, our country, and of course, as the grades get older, the world. And this is how we define civic knowledge, skills, and dispositions. The knowledge being what we need to know in order to be civically engaged, that information, the background knowledge, as someone mentioned in the chat. The civic skills are what students need to be able to do to be civically engaged. And those are broken down into intellectual skills and participatory skills. So analyzing, communicating, being able to use evidence to explain your argument or your reasoning. And then dispositions, the values, virtues, and behaviors that we need in order to be civically engaged. And so that's where the tolerance and empathy and perspective taking and equality and equity all live. So again, I anchor us in this to help us understand that this is written into the standards, that this is what the state is asking us to teach our students. And then we'll go a bit into why this matters. Why do we want to do this as educators? Fabian.
So why does teaching civics matter? And then there's this beautiful quote Some of the greatest anti-oppressive leaders and change agents in the world have held a strong sense of self and knowledge of other people, identity, skills, intellect, and criticality. We want to help cultivate students who will not be neutral on oppression, or students who would contribute to more oppression in the world. Instead, we want to cultivate young people who, across the course of their lifetimes, will disrupt, disquiet, or unhinge oppression. So coming from Brazil, I had the privilege to have had classes with Paulo Freire very briefly. And Paulo Freire was a philosopher of education. And one of the things that he spoke a lot in classroom was the fact that education has always disguised itself as something neutral. Right? We are at schools to teach content, and this content is neutral. Math is neutral. Science is neutral. And he made it very clear there's no such thing as neutrality. If you claim to be neutral, what you're doing actually is siding with the oppressor. And he also talked a lot about the fact that there's the oppressed and there's the oppressor. And sometimes the oppressed think that the only way out is by becoming the oppressor. And what is the role of education and what is the role of ourselves as educators is to empower our students to understand that there is a third pathway. You don't need to become the oppressor. If you are oppressed, you need to free yourself from it. And if you are somehow the oppressor, you can free yourself too and take this third pathway. So, and I think this curriculum does just that. So civics matter because it teaches us to free ourselves and find this third pathway that is sometimes so hard to find. So that's why I feel like this curriculum is a passion of mine right now, because Paulo Freire is a philosopher of education. And this takes this philosophy into something concrete that we can actually do in our classrooms. So, and why does teaching civics matter more than ever today? So we are in this quasi post-pandemic world, right? But during the pandemic, what happened was there was this huge divide between schools and families. And again, coming from where I come from, the concept of education involves all of those people, all of those school people and all of those family people. And why is that? Because in my background, the word education doesn't mean schooling only. Educação, which is the term that we use in Portuguese, is way broader than schooling. Educação means your manners. Educação means your values. Educação means everything that you are as a person. But then there's this clash. Who's responsible for educação? The family or schools? Because many times schools claiming to be neutral say, no, educação comes from home, right? Your manners, your values. This comes from home. Our role at school is to teach you content. And I think now more than ever, this divide, this disconnect between families and schools have brought this discussion about what is educação to the forefront. There's like an urgent need for this clash to somehow be fixed. Somehow families and schools need to come together again and create this possibility of like an educação that really forms individuals who are scholarly rounded, right? Like well-rounded scholars, but at the same time, well-rounded people with the values and dispositions and the knowledge that is necessary for you to become a citizen of the world. So that's why I feel like more than ever, we need this curriculum and we need this approach. And this is more than a curriculum. I feel like this is a framework. This is an approach that we need to take the stance of like doing in our classrooms all the time, not only in the social studies lessons. And I feel like we're going to touch upon those things later in this discussion, but it seems like throughout the day, we are teaching civics.
Thank you. So how can we cultivate civic identities, knowledge, skills, and disposition in elementary students? We're going to, that framework that Fabiani mentioned, we're going to break it down into 4 pieces. First is to recognize what we're already doing. So much of elementary education in particular, and elementary educators are such experts at this, is building community. And so much of it is identifying, these are already parts of the day that I'm embedding civics into. And the next piece then is to make it explicit, to name it, and then to pull out the why, and then to connect and integrate it. So you're going to see examples of this, and then we'll, just put a note catcher again in the chat. Please make a copy of it, just so you can start recording some of these ideas for yourself. How are you already implementing civics that you can pull to the surface, and what ways can you amplify your civics instruction? And so we're going to highlight some examples from the Children Discovering Justice curriculum. The examples are going to focus on perspective taking and empathy, building student civil discourse, and then building students' understanding of justice, equity, and advocacy. And again, be thinking back to that quote, that Dr. Goldie Muhammad quote about what it is that we're ultimately trying to build in our students, that advocacy to change the world. And we're going to do this through 4 elements, through reading and writing, vocabulary, vignettes, and through practice. And Fabiani is going to share some examples from her classroom.
Yeah, so one of the things that is really amazing in this curriculum is the fact that it works on vocabulary so heavily. And sometimes we kind of like lose sight of this in our classrooms. We don't think that reinforcing vocabulary is that necessary. We are way more focused on the content, but here I feel like both things are connected. So when you're teaching a word such as perspective, you are beginning by just thinking about the meaning with the students, asking the students to repeat the word perspective several times, repeat it to the floor, repeat it to the ceiling, repeat it to the wall in a playful way, so that students, first of all, need to understand, begin to understand how to pronounce this word. Think of English language learners. We have so many of them in our classrooms. The pronunciation of the word perspective, for example, is a hard one, even for like native speakers of English. Can you imagine dual language learners having to learn the pronunciation of this word? They need a lot of practice, and the curriculum does just that. And then there's a lot of like vignettes and examples that teach students how to use the word perspective in their grade level, in their lives. So in this example that you are seeing here, 2 students were looking at vignettes. One of them was about a roller coaster and a person saying that it's worthwhile to wait in line for hours to go on the roller coaster. And they had to pick up this little poster that says, I agree or I disagree with this perspective. And they learn how to agree or disagree respectfully. So they had lots of opportunities to like act it out and practice how to talk to each other about things with my intervention and my support, so that after several instances, they were way more capable of using this word. And now in my classroom, the word perspective is something that we use on a daily basis. Today, for example, one student came to me and said, oh, that friend said something to me that I didn't like. So I followed the student and I said, how can you advocate for yourself? Another vocabulary word. How do you advocate for yourself in this situation? And then the student advocated and said that he didn't like what the other one had said. And then I looked at the other one and I said, okay, did you understand his perspective? Do you agree with this perspective? What is your perspective? And then beautifully, the student said, my perspective is, and then he stated his opinion. So this is coming along beautifully in several instances. And that's why I'm saying this is an approach more than a curriculum. This is an approach to teaching. This is a framework for myself as an educator as well.
Even in, I was in my office, I think it was last week, and one of Fabiani's students was there having a bit of a tough time after some disagreement, some conflict with friends. And this is outside the context of his classroom. This is away from his teacher. This is outside of the Children Discovering Justice 15-minute lesson chunk. And he used that word with me. I didn't even bring it up. He used the word, my friend's perspective. And this is a 5-year-old. And just shows, again, that in the naming of it, the explicitness of it, and the integration of it across all subject areas is so important to cultivating those skills. So you just saw an example from a kindergarten classroom, and now for our upper elementary folks on the call, here's an example of some perspective taking from 5th grade students. And listen to, even though they're talking about, in this scenario, it's about ownership, who does the slime belong to? Think about the skills and the dispositions that are being cultivated in this small scenario, and how you can start here and propel that for further discussions.
So Melissa, why did you say the slime belongs to Tom?
Since Nia lost it and Tom found it, he asked everyone whose it was, and he probably asked Nia, and she probably said no. So since it says that he asked around and nobody claimed it, so he technically does have a right to steal it from her, since she didn't claim it back.
So Tom asked around, nobody said yes. So maybe Nia could have been sick.
So yeah, Tom, he just found something on the floor and picked it up. That's not his property. He did not pay for that, so therefore it does not belong to him. Also, no one gave it to him as a gift. So why is he taking it? It's Nia's property. She lost it, and Tom does not have the right to take it. Once he asks everybody, it's a week ago. You might have forgotten about that slime, but that still doesn't mean it's Tom's. Nia didn't gift it to Tom, so Tom shouldn't have it.
I feel like this is a trick question.
I noticed that he said he asked around, so it doesn't mean that he asked everyone. So he could have not have asked Nia.
So it sounds like we need a little more information. What would you ask Tom if you had a chance to question him?
I would ask him how if he talked to everybody or just a couple of students.
Very good. And Christian, why did you say this sounds like a trick question?
Because it sounds like one of those questions that seems simple, but then again, they're difficult to answer. And I don't know what you have up your sleeve.
So hopefully you heard in this example, the skills that we mentioned in that framework of thinking critically, using reasoning and evidence to explain students' opinions and perspectives, students building an understanding of what their beliefs are. And I think so often when we talk about civics, teachers kind of pull back and say, I'm not ready to have these conversations with my students about larger social justice issues, racial justice issues that are, conflicts that are happening in our world and communities, which may be the case if we don't start with students in kindergarten with just understanding this as a framework of conversations, period. If we can build in time for students to explain their perspectives, understand what matters to them, articulate their points, listen respectfully about scenarios like this that is in their everyday interpersonal life, you've built that framework for when larger conflicts happen in the classroom, in the community, in the world. You already have the dispositions in students built to be prepared for those conversations, and in yourselves as educators and as leaders. And so you're able to jump into these conversations about justice and about what is just. And so here, Fabian, I don't know if you want to speak to these examples of just, again, the vocabulary piece with students and them using it in their classroom.
Yeah, so this was an example of like a vignette that we used in our classroom. And again, as I said, this is a curriculum that you use during your social studies periods. I only have 2 slots of 15 minutes for my social studies lessons. But again, this is a curriculum that you can use at any time. So I used one example of these vignettes, for example, in a restorative circle in my classroom. So I use these vignettes to spark conversation during circle, and students were amazing in their way of like going about and showing their perspective and using the vocabulary that they were not prompted to use. They were just there and they were talking about those vignettes, and they were engaged, and they were agents of that conversation more than just participants. So what I would say is that vocabulary sparks conversation, sparks agency, sparks the civic skills and dispositions that this curriculum is supposed to spark, and power. So if anything, this curriculum promotes power in the classroom.
Another example outside of vocabulary, our curriculum highlights justice advocates in our state, in our communities, thinking about relying on people beyond just ourselves as educators and our other students in the classroom to bring in multiple perspectives, to bring in, again, windows and mirrors for students to have concrete examples of real life justice advocates. And so here's an example from our second grade curriculum, which again, the topic of justice is the environment.
You're a young person and you want to get involved, like when you see something that you know isn't right, say something. Tell your teachers, tell a caring adult, and ask them, ask lots of questions, right? Seek information. Like, I think that that's also something that's really important. We live in an information era. Lots of people have smartphones, but they're only smart if you do something with them. So that look up information. Find out what is a biomass plant? How does this work? You know, what is pollution? How can we make this better? Right? So talk to your friends on the playground. Say, hey, have you ever thought about this? How many of your friends have asthma? What does that mean to them? Find out about their lives, right? Because we also tend to think that our life, our world, like that's it. And that's how everybody else experiences the world. And that's not true. And I feel like when we can know how other people experience the world, and we can think about that when we make decisions about where are we going to put a biomass plant? Where are we going to put a highway? Where are we going to plant trees? Where are we going to put parks? Like, what do the resources look like in our communities? What does your school look like? Ask your principal. Talk to your, caring adults about being on the PTO or who's on the school committee, because these are the people who are making decisions about the environment built that you will be a part of. So these are ways that you can get involved about things that are immediately in your environment. And the greatest activist is usually when something personal has happened to you. That will turn you into the biggest advocate, because now you know what it feels like. Wow, they have lunch that I don't like anymore, or they took the swings away from the playground, or maybe your music classes, did those go away? You can talk about those things and even make a little petition in your classroom to let folks know, this is what I want, this is what I need.
So through these examples, as well as through the vignettes, we're constantly toggling back and forth with this idea of justice as something that has happened in history in big moments, something that's happening today in big movements, and something that is happening every single moment that we're just interacting with people, that we're evaluating what matters to us, that we're taking part of this justice advocate cycle. We're noticing, we're observing, we're learning, we're seeking information, we're planning to act, we're acting, and then we're back to reflecting on that process and evaluating if that worked or not. And here's an example from kindergarten. Again, that explicitness in vocabulary. I'm going to play so you can hear for a young student actually speaking about justice.
We know that justice is about things being fair. I can explain justice. I can. It means, sit with me. It means fair to everybody. What you need, what. Not always what you want, not about what you need, but for
Finish listening.
good for everybody.
Good for everybody and what you need. Okay, go ahead and add to that.
Before what you need and then what you want.
Oh, so first comes needs and then comes wants.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, go ahead. What were you going to say?
It's that everybody, it's not everybody just needs, everybody needs different things. Not everybody needs the same thing.
So how did they get there, Fabiani?
Yeah, so so this is the best example ever. So after we talked about this wants and needs thing, I have a student in my classroom who's grappling with the pencil grasp, right? He's holding the pencil like this, and I called the OT to observe him. So the OT said, yeah, Fabiani, he needs to use this pencil grips. And so he gave me a couple, and one of them is this one. It's in the shape of a cat, I think, and it's the cutest thing in the world. So I want this for myself. And when the kids in the classroom looked at it, they all wanted it. And I said that belonged to that particular student, right? And then one of my kids came to me. She's barely 5. She's a junior kindergartner. She came to me and she said, yeah, Miss Fabiani, I really want that pencil grip, but I know that I don't need it. So I'm not going to take it. And like, it filled my heart. I was just stunned that she was able to like transfer that higher order thinking, right? So using a situation, a concrete situation in the classroom, and transfer all that knowledge into something real and meaningful. So yeah, so I'll say that this curriculum is way beyond what you feel you can teach in your classroom. It's gonna stay with them. And I have a couple of examples of things that parents told me as well, but I feel like this one, I want this for myself. So, but I know that I don't need it.
And I think that also speaks, outside, of course, the curriculum, that expression, the curriculum is only as good as the hands that it's in. And so as educators, what's our responsibility, again, to pull out those civic skills and dispositions and use them in all areas of the day. It's one step to teach those words explicitly, that vocabulary. And then the fact that Fabiani as an educator is really pointing this out to students in other areas of the day and giving them that habit of mind of, this is what I'm doing. This is my civic identity. This is how I function as a member of my community. And here's another example.
Yeah, and I can speak about that example as well. So this was during the social studies lesson. So there was this vignette about a student who was playing isolately while other 2 students were playing and chatting with themselves and not including the other student. So I had my kids act the story out. So I gave them blocks, and the blocks were very similar. Luckily, were very similar to the one in the vignette. So I had 3 of them playing with the blocks, 2 of them chatting while the other one was playing isolately. And then I called the justice advocate, right? And I said, so I want you to advocate, to be a justice advocate right now. So what do you do? So my idea was that he was going to go to the other 2 kids and say, listen, you guys need to include that student in your play. And surprisingly, that's not what he did. What he did was, okay, he said, I know what to do, Ms. Fabiani. He went to the student who was isolated and said, can I play with you? And the other 2 were just looking in surprise because they were not expecting that to happen. And so, and this is what justice looks like, right? It's blurry. It's not black and white. It's perspective. And that's what's going on with me. They are surprising me in so many ways in that classroom. And this was like a very concrete example.
And so there's opportunities as well for students to, of course, write and reflect on justice through writing. Here's an example, again, from kindergarten, where students write about what justice in their community looks like. And in 2nd grade, students are working on a digital artifact as they're moving into that advocacy unit about advocating again for that topic, environmental justice. And so I love the quote from Veronica Boyce-Mancia from How to Be a Global Thinker that just points out for us the importance of cultivating that disposition in students of just what matters to me. And, surprisingly, schools seldom teach students how to determine whether something matters to them. And this is really the end of the civics curriculum, of the Children Discovering Justice curriculum, where students choose an issue that matters to them. They vote on an issue in their classroom community, and then they take action using that justice advocacy cycle and applying the skills that they've learned in the first few modules. And so we'd love to give you an opportunity to practice now. We're going to put you into breakout groups, but first you need to open this document that I just posted in the chat. Everyone should have editing access to the document. And you're just going to take just 4 minutes to do this sort in your groups and be thinking about what civic skills and dispositions are you cultivating in this activity, what skills are being reinforced, and then why those skills are important. And of course, please introduce yourself to those in your group with your name, what your role is, and then and do the sort activity. So. All right, rooms should be open now. You can go ahead and join them. And again, you'll just have 4 minutes to do this activity. And the directions are in your note catcher as well. How was your group, Dave?
We're,
Were you with?
there a little confusion on the slides. There were 2 slides for group 4, so they worked it out.
Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering about time. We're running
Yeah.
short here.
Yeah.
So,
The groups are closing. I'm not sure.
yeah.
All right, welcome back. Let's just have apologies if there was any confusion on the slides. Hopefully you figured out where you were supposed to sort. I saw some good movement going on in these slides. So if we could just hear from one person, just due to time, what civic skills and dispositions were being activated during this activity, and or why those would be important skills.
I'll start. So we had one about litter, and it said that anybody, if you litter in any amount, you have to pay a fine of $500. And so we were talking about, well, if you litter something very small, I said a toothpick as an example, but it could be a bottle cap or something. Should you pay $500 the same as somebody who dumps an old couch on the side of the road, or somebody who pours out their old car oil in the woods, you know? So there was this conditional, debating, happening and sort of qualifying it. And it was, we ended up kind of putting it in the middle.
Love it. Yeah, a great example of, sometimes justice might seem black and white. And when you really dig into it, it's of course not. There's so much nuance to that and meaning to unpack. And so hopefully you saw that at least in some of your examples of how you could debate an either or, and then cultivate again those skills of explaining your thinking with evidence and reasoning, and understanding multiple perspectives. So we're going to move on just for the sake of time to kind of being able to take this and then apply it to your practice, whether you use this curriculum and tools or not. Again, another quote from Veronica Boyce-Mansilla, that students cultivate dispositions not through occasional lessons, units, or annual school events, but through ongoing participation in classroom cultures in which these dispositions are visibly valued and extensively practiced. And so be thinking about how civics already connects to what you're doing in your school, your classroom, your district. And we named some of you named these in the chat: the social emotional learning routine, student discourse, responsive classroom, culturally responsive teaching, and what you're already doing to practice these skills. And so much of that first piece of just recognizing it. My students are already talking about justice, but it's about naming that vocabulary word to them. My students are already sharing their perspective. It's about teaching them that vocabulary word and then using it repeatedly so they can really build on not just the vocabulary word in context to civics, but across content areas. And so we're going to explore these ideas to close us out. So again, you've already recognized what it is you're already doing. Then it is to name it, to teach and use the vocabulary, to call it out in your practice, I love how you're advocating for more time on your test to ensure equity. I'm going to be using these name sticks instead of, picking on hands. Displaying it in your classroom through posters, through charts, through stickies. A lot of you already have classroom norms or respect agreements, making those connections between civics and those things that are already being implemented. And then to pull out the why, there's this framework, the 3 whys framework that I love on why might this topic matter to me, to the people around me, and then to the world. And then finally, to make that connection really explicit to not just what you're doing in your social studies time, but across all areas. So reading about issues, writing about issues, talking about issues. And again, if you've built the foundation and the frameworks for students to have these discussions, to understand, this is how I communicate my ideas respectfully. This is why I need to listen to understand. This is why I need to take in other people's perspectives. Then those larger conversations about social issues are much easier to have because the foundation for Lastly, I'll just close with assessing and monitoring. So we want to really tune in to students' discourse during these conversations. Are students just stating their opinion, or are they explaining their opinion and perspective with reasoning? Are they asking questions that show they're really seeking information or opinions of others? Are they just pulling from their own background knowledge, or are they also going a step further to research and look into and explore issues? One of the ways that we've attempted to showcase this for teachers is through a rubric, which either could be used one rubric for one student, or you could divide it into lessons and just make note what students are using the vocabulary I'm teaching explicitly, making personal connections, seeking other perspectives, questioning, following those discourse norms, and then advocating for fairness or justice. And I want to leave us with this quote: before you finish eating breakfast in the morning, you've depended on more than half the world. This is the way our universe is structured. This is interrelated quality. We aren't going to have peace on earth until we recognize the basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. So again, just thinking about why we do this, why we're teaching civics to our students, and why we want them to understand that they're members of a larger world, a larger community than themselves and the people that they see every day. And we need to cultivate those skills in them. Again, please just be thinking about the why and then the how. So what strategies can you take away today that you can use tomorrow, whether it's in your leadership position, your classroom teaching position, to cultivate these skills in students? And if you'd be so kind to name that in the chat, we would love that. And I'm going to put the feedback survey in the chat as well. And on the final page of the slides, there's resources. Feedback surveys in the chat. There's resources for you to explore more on your own. We have the Children Discovering Justice curriculum resources, a link to our middle and high school event featuring Sean Ellis, the subject of Trial 4 documentary in Netflix, and then some resources for general civics. If I could recommend 2 articles to every educator to support the cultivation of civic skills and integration of civic dispositions into the classroom, it would be these 2 articles that are linked in: How to Be a Global Thinker and The Urgent Call to Replace Fear with Curiosity. So please, you have a resource list. I'm going to drop it in the chat again if they're short articles. So I highly recommend those. And thank you for being here with us today and supporting civics in our youngest students.
So Laura and Fabiana, I want to thank you for such an informative presentation this afternoon. You've really highlighted just how important civics is from K to 12, not only in the high school grades that we so often seem to focus on. So just the importance of that, particularly this idea that really civics is something that can be taught even to the earliest, youngest students in our schools is so important to lay the groundwork for the work that's to come and later in school, and to build the world that we're hoping to create out of all of this. So I just want to thank you for the really concrete strategies you've offered us and the deep thinking about all of this. And just the idea that civics is really the responsibility of everybody, not only in the school, but certainly a big theme that we're trying to promote as a coalition is the importance of civics for everybody to be concerned about. And that includes not only schools, but community leaders, all of us in the community, our government officials and business leaders and everybody else. So we're really trying to exercise that and make sure that that becomes the major concern for everybody these days. And again, I want to thank both of you for making such a great case for that.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Fabiani, for participating with us today, especially.
And happy birthday, Fabiani.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
So in closing here, Laura has shared with you an evaluation that we really appreciate to getting your feedback on. We use that not only to focus in on some aspects of this particular presentation, but also in thinking about future presentations. So please do take a moment to complete that evaluation. We'll appreciate that. In addition, I just want to include in the chat here the links that we've given to you earlier in this presentation, but if in case you missed them, they're here again. The full resource list that I mentioned earlier that includes links to the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, as well as ways to connect with us to register for future events. Things like Civic Learning Week that we hosted earlier in March and other events as well. So if you go to that site, to the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition site, you will find additional information about all of our work. And as I said earlier, we're really entering a pretty key season for us in terms of advocating for further funding for civic education in the state. So I'd encourage any of you, if you're interested in joining with us in making that case to legislators and others, to please contact us. We're really looking to include more teachers in our advocacy work so that legislators can hear directly from you about your work and the importance of all of that. So I do want to thank you, all of you, for joining us this afternoon. And again, thanks to Laura and Fabiane for the presentation this afternoon. And we'll look forward to hearing and seeing all of you at future sessions like this. So thanks for joining us and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.